The cry came like a crack in glass, sharp and sudden, and the whole orphanage seemed to hold its breath. It was near midnight. Rain tapped the roof, keys slept in the office drawer, and the corridors were dark except for one thin line of light under the chapel door. From inside came the sound of a boy sobbing. Sister Agnes reached the handle and paused. She had heard many cries in this place, but this one shook her bones. She pushed the door and found Luca on the floor in front of the statue. His shoulders jumped with each breath. His face was wet and turned up to the Virgin Mary as if to a mother. The statue stood tall, life-sized, one hand open, the other near her heart. 3 candles burned low at the base, their flames thin and tired like small tongues. The chapel was old, but it was loved. Stone walls kept the winter out, just, and the floor held marks from 100 shoes. A painted window showed blue and gold when the sun was kind, but at night it was a dark eye. On the front wall, the statue watched the room with a soft, calm face that children trusted. Many of them, like Luca, had no graves to visit and no hands to hold. Tonight, Luca had broken. His whisper ran like water over stone. "Please," he said, "please, please, please." He told the statue what he could not tell of any person, that he missed his mother's song, that he missed his father's coat that smelled like rain, that he was afraid of sleep because he woke up alone. Sister Agnes knelt by him, but did not touch him. She only said, "I am here." Other children arrived, drawn by the sound. Tomas, who fought at meals. Mina, who never spoke above a whisper. 2 little twins with hair like corn silk. They stood at the back, unsure. A night caretaker came too, young and restless, with a torch in his pocket and no time for prayers. He muttered, "Let's not be dramatic," and reached to turn off the candles. Sister Agnes shook her head, and he stopped, surprised at himself. Then it happened. The flames on the candles grew taller, though no one touched the wicks. The light softened the statue's face, and for a breath, it seemed to change, not to a new face, but to a kinder one. Every head lifted, the air filled with the clean scent of roses, faint at first, then clear as if a door had opened on a summer garden. The caretaker frowned and checked the windows. They were shut. No flowers stood in water, no spray, no perfume, and yet the smell grew and held. Luca's sobs slowed. He wiped his face with his sleeve and looked up at Mary as if hearing a song he knew. His mouth trembled, but he was quiet now. He reached out one hand and touched the stone base. It felt cold to his skin, but he smiled a small, careful smile, the first in weeks. Sister Agnes let out a breath she had been holding. The caretaker whispered, "It's a draft," and stepped to the window. He checked the latch, the frame, the cracked sill. Wind should have killed the flames. It did not. He sniffed the air and turned red, as if caught in a story he had mocked. He backed away and stood with the others. The children moved closer, slow as if in a dream. Mina placed a paper flower on the step. The twins copied her, serious for once, their small faces bright in the candlelight. Tomas wiped his nose on his sleeve and did not punch anyone. Someone began to hum, and the sound grew until the whole room was one low, gentle note. After a while, the candles settled, and the scent thinned but did not go. Luca leaned against Sister Agnes and fell asleep sitting up, head warm on her arm. She stayed still so he would not wake. Outside, rain eased to a soft mist over the yard. The night caretaker locked the outer door and stood beside them, not speaking. Word went through the dorms and the staff rooms in whispers. Some said it was only heat, or nerves, or the mind playing tricks after a hard day. Others said they had seen the statue's eyes soften, and that was enough for them. In the morning, children woke calmer than usual. Breakfast was still loud, but there were less elbows, less shouting, more sharing of toast. Headmistress Clara arrived after dawn, hair pulled back, coat still damp. She listened to every witness, took notes, and sent for the electrician to check the chapel lights. She checked the supply closet for room spray, found none, and shook her head slowly. Clara was not quick to speak of signs, but she was not quick to mock either. She stood before the statue alone and whispered, "Help us care for them well." That night, Luca woke again and went back to the chapel. He lit a small candle and set a drawing at Mary's feet. A house, two big hands, a blue sky. He did not ask for a miracle. He only said, "Please stay with us." A breeze crossed the floor, though the door was shut, and the candle flame bowed as if to answer. In the dorm, Tomas told the twins he had smelled roses, and they nodded with sleepy smiles. Mina wrote a note and slid it under the chapel door. "Thank you for listening." The caretaker stood his watch and kept one hand on the keys, the other on his chest, not sure why. Sister Agnes made tea and sat in the back pew, eyes on Luca, eyes on the statue, eyes on the little flame that did not fail. The orphanage slept, but the chapel stayed awake, holding a boy and a room full of hope. The story of that night spread quickly through the orphanage. By breakfast the next morning, every child, every staff member, and even the cook in the kitchen had heard whispers about the candles and the smell of roses. Some laughed nervously, calling it imagination, but others carried wide eyes and soft voices. "I saw it myself," Mina whispered to her table. "It was real." The twins nodded with crumbs on their cheeks. Even Tomas, who normally scoffed at anything gentle, stayed quiet. Headmistress Clara walked through the halls that day with the same calm step as always, but inside her thoughts ran fast. She had worked at the orphanage for 20 years, knew every loose board and leaky pipe. She had patched clothes and written letters to town officials begging for funding. She did not believe in fairy tales, but she could not ignore the faces of the children when they spoke of the chapel. Their voices held not fear, but something brighter, hope. That alone made her pause. In her office, she opened the records. Thick ledgers bound in fading leather. They told the history of the orphanage, when it had been founded, who had donated money, who had sent children through its doors. Among them, she found one old folder, edges yellowed, labeled simply "The Chapel." Inside were notes in longhand, some pages written 2 centuries ago. The statue, she learned, had been given in the early 1800s by a wealthy widow named Isabella Romano. She had lost her only child to illness and had no family left. With her grief, she chose to build something lasting. The record said she had commissioned a sculptor to carve the Virgin Mary to be a mother for the motherless. The statue was placed in the chapel when the orphanage first opened. Isabella herself had stood with the first children as it was blessed. Clara leaned back in her chair, the paper trembling in her hands. More notes followed. In the 1940s, when bombs had fallen near the town during the war, the orphanage had been spared. Windows shattered, plaster cracked, but the chapel stood untouched. Children had crowded inside and prayed at the statue until the skies cleared. In the 1930s, when sickness swept through the district, staff wrote that every child who had placed flowers before the statue recovered quickly, though neighboring houses had suffered loss. Clara read page after page of stories that sounded like legend, but were written in the hand of those who had lived them. She called Sister Agnes to her office and showed her the folder. The older woman read with a small smile. "I always felt she was watching," she said, nodding toward the memory of the statue. "Not just watching, but listening." That night, more children came to the chapel than ever before. Some knelt, some sat cross-legged on the cold floor. Some leaned against the wall with eyes closed. Mina whispered her thanks into the silence. The twins sang a soft rhyme they had made up. Even Tomas stood in the corner, arms folded, but his gaze never left the statue's face. Luca sat at the front again, calmer this time. He simply held a small toy car in his hand and set it on the step, a gift no one asked for, but one he needed to give. The candles burned low, but never once flickered out, even when a draft pushed through the old window frames. The air was heavy with quiet, and again the scent of roses drifted over the room. Some children pressed their noses to their sleeves to hide tears. The caretaker lingered by the door, not mocking this time, but pale and uneasy. By the following week, the town had heard the tale. A local shopkeeper brought bread for the children and left it in the chapel. A woman from the market came with flowers and placed them at Mary's feet. "For the little ones," she whispered. Soon more came, not in crowds, but in steady trickles. Townspeople who had once ignored the orphanage now walked its halls. They touched the statue's base, lit candles, and left offerings. The chapel was no longer quiet and forgotten. It was alive, with footsteps and breath. Not everyone believed. A young caretaker named Daniel, new to the orphanage, rolled his eyes when he saw townsfolk kneeling. "It's only stone," he muttered. But even he noticed things he could not explain. Once, during a storm, lightning shook the building. The whole orphanage trembled, yet the candles inside the chapel stood steady, their flames tall and sure. Another time, he locked the door at night, certain he had snuffed the lights, only to find them burning in the morning, wax pooled but not spent. He began carrying the keys differently after that, with more care. Children started speaking to the statue as though it were a person. Mina told her secrets she never told another soul. The twins brought drawings of their dreams. Even Tomas, one late evening when he thought no one heard, whispered a wish to see his brother again. The atmosphere of the orphanage shifted. Fewer fights broke out. The noise of quarrels lessened. The children began helping one another in small ways. sharing blankets, splitting biscuits, reading together in corners. The staff noticed but said little, fearing to disturb whatever peace had settled over them. Headmistress Clara invited a local historian, a quiet man named Paolo, to examine the records. He confirmed the statue's age and the story of Isabella Romano. He added his own findings. A diary from Isabella's time where she wrote, "Let this statue stand for the children who have no arms to hold them. Let it be their mother when they cannot remember their own." Clara read the line aloud to the children, and silence fell so thick that even the youngest stilled their fidgeting. Soon the chapel became more than a corner of the orphanage. It became the heart. Townspeople and orphans alike filled it with whispers, with songs, with prayers spoken or unspoken. People came not to marvel at stone, but to sit in its presence. Some left with red eyes, others with lighter hearts. One evening, Sister Agnes walked through the hall and found Daniel, the caretaker, sitting alone before the statue. His torch lay unused on the bench. He looked up when she entered, his face pale. "I thought I heard humming," he admitted, "like someone singing to the boy." His voice faltered. "But there was no one here?" Agnes only placed a hand on his shoulder. "Sometimes love lingers," she said. For the first time in years, the orphanage felt less like a house of sorrow and more like a home. The children called the statue "Our Mother." Luca, who had cried so hard that first night, now smiled more often. He still missed his parents, but when he sat in the chapel, he felt less alone. And in the silence that wrapped around him like a blanket, he whispered, "Thank you." The statue did not answer in words, but in the calm that filled the room, everyone knew she had heard. Winter pressed hard on the orphanage. The roof leaked in 2 places. The boiler coughed more than it worked, and the cupboards grew thin with food. Headmistress Clara sat late into nights with bills spread across her desk, her glasses perched low on her nose. Numbers did not lie. The orphanage was running out of money. The council had already warned her. "Funds are gone. We cannot support a building this old. The children will be moved. The property will be sold." The words were final, like the swing of a door shutting. Clara did not tell the children at first, but rumors traveled quickly. Tomas overheard staff whispering. Mina saw a letter. Soon the whole dorm knew. Some children cried into pillows, afraid of being separated. Others grew quiet and refused to speak. Luca heard it too, but instead of hiding, he walked to the chapel and knelt before the statue. He pressed his hands together and whispered, "Please don't let them take us away. Please, let us stay." The chapel had become their anchor. Every night, children gathered with candles and small gifts. They brought drawings, marbles, ribbons, even biscuits wrapped in napkins. They placed these at Mary's feet, little pieces of their lives laid out in trust. The staff let them, unwilling to break what little hope remained. Sister Agnes often sat at the back, her lips moving in prayer, while Daniel, once a skeptic, now checked the candles carefully to make sure none were ever left to burn alone. The final blow came in January, a letter of closure pinned to the office board. In 3 weeks, the orphanage would shut. The children would be sent to different institutions. The statue, considered property of the building, would be removed and stored in a warehouse, maybe even sold. Clara read it aloud to the staff with a heavy voice. When she finished, silence filled the room like ice. Then, faintly, Mina asked, "Can we tell her?" Clara blinked. "Tell who?" "Our mother," Mina whispered. "The statue. She listens." That night, every child crowded into the chapel. Snow pressed against the windows, and the wind rattled the roof, but inside, the candles burned steady. Luca walked to the front. His voice shook, but he spoke clearly. "They want to take us away. They want to take you away, but we don't want to leave. Please help us." One by one, the children added their words. Tomas placed his brother's photo at the base. Mina laid her notebook, filled with drawings. The twins whispered their names together. The smallest child left a ragged teddy bear, its fur nearly gone. The moment hung heavy. Then the air shifted. The smell of roses filled the chapel, stronger than ever before, as though every corner bloomed. The candles flared, tall and white, without smoke. And then, soft and low, a sound rose into the air. It was like humming, a lullaby carried on the wind. No mouth moved, yet the sound filled the room. The children froze, wide-eyed. Some cried, but not from fear. Luca smiled through tears. "She's singing," he whispered. The staff stood in awe. Clara herself, the woman who had always kept her feet on the ground, covered her face and wept. Daniel knelt beside the children, no longer mocking, his eyes wet. Sister Agnes whispered, thank you," over and over. The humming continued, gentle as if rocking the whole room, until the children fell quiet, their fear eased. Slowly, the candles dimmed back to normal, but the roses lingered all night. By morning, the chapel floor was covered in fresh white lilies. No one had brought them. The doors had been locked. Snow lay thick outside. Yet the flowers covered the steps and stretched across the aisle like a blanket of snow brought inside. The children gasped when they saw. Some ran to gather the blossoms, holding them close. Luca picked one and pressed it to his chest. "She answered us," he said simply. The news spread like fire. Neighbors arrived first, then people from nearby towns. They stood in the chapel, staring at the lilies, at the smiling children. Reporters came, their cameras flashing, their questions sharp. Clara did not know what to say. All she could offer was the truth. We prayed, and this is what we found. The photos of lilies scattered across stone floors filled newspapers by evening. The story went further, onto radios, onto screens, across the country. Donations began pouring in. Letters arrived with coins taped inside, with bills folded neatly, with notes written in shaky handwriting. For the children, for the statue, for hope. Wealthy donors came forward too, moved by the story of the boy's cry, the scent of roses, the lilies that appeared in the night. The council, embarrassed by the sudden flood of attention, reversed its decision. The orphanage would not close. Funds were allocated. Repairs were promised. When Clara read the letter aloud, canceling the closure, cheers burst through the halls. The children hugged each other, shouted, danced. Luca knelt once more at the statue and whispered, "Thank you." His voice was steady now, not desperate, but full of trust. The statue remained untouched, her calm face unchanged. But to the children, she was no longer just marble. She was their mother, the one who had listened when no one else could. The scar in their hearts softened. They still had no parents, no families to claim them, but they had each other, and they had her. Life did not become perfect. The roof still leaked sometimes, meals were still plain, fights still flared. But the spirit of the place had changed. The children shared more, laughed more, and fought less. Staff worked with lighter hearts. The chapel was never empty. Candles burned every day. Roses and lilies appeared often at the steps, brought by visitors or, sometimes, by no one at all. Reporters eventually moved on, but the story remained. Pilgrims visited quietly, not in crowds, but in steady streams. They touched the statue's base, lit candles, and left small offerings. Some wept, some left smiling. Many whispered, "She listened to them, she will listen to us too." Luca grew braver. He played more, laughed louder. He began helping younger children with their reading. The other orphans followed his lead. They were no longer only children without parents. They were part of something larger, a family bound not by blood, but by hope, by faith, by the memory of a night when roses bloomed in winter. The miracle was not only the lilies or the humming, it was what those things did, how they gave broken children a sense of belonging, how they turned despair into courage, how they reminded everyone that love could still be found in stone halls and tired hands. The statue stood, arms open, face gentle, silent but never cold, and when the children walked past, they always looked up, just to be sure she was still there. Each time, they felt she was. Spring came to the orphanage, and with it a kind of peace the old building had not known in decades. The walls still carried cracks, the windows still rattled in the wind, but the air inside was different now. Laughter ran through the halls more easily. The smell of fresh bread sometimes drifted from the kitchen, thanks to a kind baker in town who had begun bringing loaves twice a week. The children painted the fences, scrubbed the steps, and planted flowers in the yard, saying they wanted it to look as beautiful as the chapel felt. Every morning the chapel doors were opened, and every night they were closed again, never once empty in between. Townspeople came with candles, students with notebooks, mothers with strollers, workers still in their uniforms. They stood in silence, touched the base of the Virgin Mary statue, and left offerings. Some prayed aloud, some whispered, some only stared at her calm face. The children of the orphanage learned quickly that they were not alone anymore. The town had claimed them, not out of pity, but out of respect. Inside the chapel, the children grew closer. They no longer went to the statue only in fear or sadness, but also in joy. When Mina won a small art contest, she placed her ribbon at Mary's feet. When Tomas finally wrote a letter to his long-lost brother, he read it aloud there before sending it. The twins, on their birthdays, placed pieces of cake on napkins as if sharing with their mother. Even Luca, who had once wept until his body shook, now came with a smile, telling the statue about his day before bed, as if she were listening with patience. The staff noticed changes too. The children fought less and helped more. Arguments at mealtime cooled quicker. Older ones helped the younger with homework. Sister Agnes said she felt the statue had become part of the rhythm of their days, like the toll of a bell, reminding them to be kind. Daniel, the once skeptical caretaker, now lit the first candle every morning without fail. He never admitted openly what he believed, but when asked why he did it, he shrugged and said, "Because someone has to be first." The miracle of the lilies had not repeated in the same way, but roses appeared often. Sometimes visitors left them, but sometimes they were found lying fresh on the steps, though no one had seen them brought. A faint fragrance often clung to the chapel in the quiet hours after dusk. No one tried to explain it anymore. They simply accepted it as part of the place. One evening, the mayor came to speak at the orphanage. Months before, he had been ready to close it forever. But now he stood humbled before the children. His voice shook as he said, "I thought this building was a burden. I see now it is a blessing. You have given the town back its heart." He promised that funds would continue, not just from the council, but from the town itself. People applauded, and some of the children hugged him. For once, he looked less like an official and more like a man relieved of a mistake. The chapel became a symbol beyond the orphanage. Pilgrims arrived from other towns, sometimes whole families, sometimes travelers passing through. They left coins, food, and letters. Many said they had heard of the orphan boy's cry, the scent of roses, the lilies in the snow, and they wanted to see the statue themselves. Some left believing, others left uncertain, but all left moved. For the children, this attention meant something more simple. They no longer felt forgotten. They were not only orphans now, they were part of a story people wanted to remember. Luca changed the most. He still carried his grief quietly, but he smiled more often, spoke with more confidence, and cared for the smaller children like an older brother. He became known as the one who always checked the chapel before bed, making sure candles were safe and the floor was clear of petals or notes. One night, Sister Agnes found him sitting cross-legged before the statue, whispering softly. She didn't hear the words, but when he turned, his face was calm, steady. "I told her I want to grow up good," he said. Clara, the headmistress, often stood at the back of the chapel, her hands clasped. She thought of the decades she had given to this place, of the despair she had felt when she believed it would close, and of the letter that had canceled that closure. She told herself she would never again take hope lightly. "The children gave their tears," she whispered once to Sister Agnes, "and hope gave them back their home." Life went on, not perfect, but better. The walls were repaired with funds raised by donations. The boiler was replaced, and a new roof kept out the rain. But the true change was in the people. The orphanage became not a forgotten building, but a place where townsfolk gathered for Christmas vigils, for spring blessings, for small moments of silence when life felt too heavy. The statue was no longer just stone. She was part of them. Years later, when people looked back, they did not speak first of the cracked roof or the empty cupboards. They spoke of the night a boy's cry filled the chapel, the candles that would not die, the roses that bloomed in winter, and the lilies that covered the floor. They spoke of how an orphanage, once close to closure, became the center of a community's heart again. For the children, the miracle was not just what they saw, it was what it gave them, the sense that they were not forgotten, that love could still find them even in their loneliness. They carried that with them as they grew. Mina became an artist, her works often featuring a quiet figure of Mary surrounded by roses. Tomas became a teacher, known for his patience with troubled children. The twins opened a bakery in town, leaving fresh bread at the chapel steps every morning. And Luca, the boy whose sobs had started it all, grew into a man who never left the town. He became caretaker of the chapel, lighting the first candle each day, just as Daniel once had. Visitors still came year after year. Some brought their pain, others their thanks. Some came curious, others desperate. Many left with tears, many with peace. And though the statue never moved or spoke, the people swore she listened. In the end, the miracle was not just about roses or lilies or candles. It was about a cry that was heard, a community that remembered, and a love that grew where there had once been only sorrow. The Virgin Mary statue stood, her hands open, her face calm, her stone body silent but never empty. She had become what Isabella Romano once intended when she gave her gift, a mother for the motherless. You do not need to believe in miracles to understand why the orphanage still stands, why the chapel is never empty, why children grown into adults still return to place flowers at her feet. You only need to remember that on one winter night, an orphan boy cried before her, and from that cry came a home saved, a town healed, and a family born of hope.